Yes, no. So let's do a little bit of that today to just make sure that you got, because I think by next week, uh, we will do very explicitly both lectures, design sessions that are just focused on moving your projects forward. And so I think if we really want to achieve something like that, it would make sense to have project discussions. And this, we could use a small portion of this session for people to publicly share just what they're excited about, like a short pitch. Anybody who wants to, and that would be one of the recruitment tools that if it resonates with other set of people, then you can reach out to that person. I know that's starting to happen on Discord, right, to a certain extent. I saw a few project threads, and I loved one of the last one that I read last night was, I think it was Ivana. Yeah, I mean, it was, what a wonderful problem, and just also kind of, I think I'd seen one of the solutions in the past, but I hadn't seen the breadth of solutions. So we could start there. If you are open to talking a little bit about it, I can put that online here, and then, and I think what we'll do is just spend the first few minutes for people who have been thinking about to make a small pitch. You can use your Fred Park to make that pitch. I think that would be a nice way, but focus a little bit more on the problem, and the solution side will keep a little open. So on that note, let me connect to the Zoom, I guess, and then we can use, and Hope, I'm assuming the Zoom link remains the same every week, right? So if I just, yeah, so, and then the folks that want to, oh, I don't join the sound, right? Okay. So if I do that, so Ivana, yeah, maybe you should take this away. Maybe do a quick intro for yourself too, so people know who you are. Yeah? Oh, I can give that to you. And these things don't have to be formal at all, I think, but it's just kind of fun to come up front. But you can just briefly talk about background, set up a problem, a broader set of a discussion, and then we'll use this to kind of anchor and say, oh, here are a few projects that we should definitely take on. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm Ivana. I'm from Spain. I'm a biomedical engineer by background, specialized in product design for healthcare, and I'm starting the biodesign fellowship here at Stanford in a few months on medical device innovation. And so I've been working on this problem, just a bit of context for those of you that don't know. An ostomy surgery is this surgery that is performed when there's a colon cancer, a Crohn's, or a colitis, for instance. That basically consists, the simple way is to imagine like colon cancer, like basically you have a part of the intestine that has cancer. So they cut that part of the intestine, they remove the cancer, and they divert the intestine through the abdominal wall, and they form what you see in red over there, which is a stoma. It's a bit of intestine that goes out here. And then all of the stools get out of this stoma. And because of that, people need to use an ostomy bag. So this bag that you see in the right, to collect all of that is going out. And I've been working for a year on this topic because even in everywhere in the world, there are a lot of problems with leakage. So the liquid, instead of getting into the bag, it gets out and it burns the skin. And you need to think that it's like acid gastric. It's not just, so it burns and it's very painful. And sometimes people need to even go back to surgery room or have infections. So this is a problem that is everywhere. But then when we were looking at solutions and I've been designing a few things, every time it's actually very costly. And I was really interested when I saw the idea of frugal innovation, of saying, okay, actually, how does it look like this problem in places, even here in the US, there are a lot of people that cannot afford the bags because they are really, really expensive. And it's not something that you use now and then. They live with the bag for their entire life. Sometimes it's temporary and they can revert the surgery, especially in children, but most people would live forever. And this bag, it's something that they change every day, sometimes every 2 days, and they just throw it, they put a new one. And I was having a look, and I saw here that, for instance, in the Philippines, they offer the surgery for free. They have like this system of charities that you can undergo the surgery, but then you need to pay yourself for the ostomy bag supplies or the treatment, and it's really expensive. So basically, people have the surgery and it saves their life, but then they are unable to use bags. So at the end, they get infections. It's very irritated. So people, what they do is that they create themselves. They basically current solutions at the end. It's like it's really like a bag of plastic and a circle that people cut to try to mimic the shape of the stoma they have, and they need to do this every day, and it's very expensive. And people, what they do is that they just I've seen even like they take like balls and they put it here and they attach a belt and or sometimes just plastic bags that they find.
Realize that photograph, that's kind of really what got me. That's a plastic jar lid that
Yes.
cut. And I mean, I think it's very clever and kind of thinking about that boundary between if this is something that on the medical space we often think about that we shouldn't. There are many reasons to not explicitly do that exactly, but then it also just sets the opportunity cost.
Yes.
Say, oh, maybe we do need something simple. Something simple does work, but it should be much better designed than somebody cutting a jar lid every day.
Exactly. No, and they did some tests and they actually work quite well, some of these designs. So it's about, yes, having a look. And then in Bangladesh, it's a little bit the same. People are not able to, a lot of people cannot afford current solutions. So they sometimes even use like this betel leaf that has like antibacterial properties. And they put it as if it was a bag a bit, no? Like it heals. I'm not sure how they attach it if the person, because at the end the person needs to move and
My intuition was this is often used, the betel leaves are used for wounds in general as a dressing. So you basically, whenever you get wounded or burn victims, for example, you could put betel leaves and then wrap. My intuition is this could be for it to not be infected during the time that it's not used.
okay.
And then at that time they might be.
Yes, because you need to think that once you have the surgery, you can have a normal life in terms of moving and you can do sports. There are a lot of super young, even kids with ostomy bags. So if there's a way to really make that those tools inside the bag, at the end they can have normal lives. So.
And just as the context of the problem, and this is once a day, but the attachment and the bandages or what anchors it to the body is not removed all the time.
No, exactly.
But that is also removed over time.
So a lot of people use these belts so that it's better attached, especially if they use a sports.
You can remove even that belt.
Yes.
I see. And then the wound or the opening is completely open, or is it closed when you don't attach a bag?
No, so basically every time it depends on the surgery. Like if you have an ileostomy, which is very high up, it means that the output is gonna be continuous. So every time you cannot predict. So they need a bag all the time. Even when changing the bag, there's output.
So that's a function of just where the surgery.
Yes.
Questions? Yeah. Yeah, this is just a conversation. But again,
Yes.
I think it's valuable to make sure that you're pitching to each other at the project. I could obviously see there's so much that we could do in this space pretty rapidly. Yes.
Is it pretty painful when you have to switch out?
No, so one interesting thing is that the stoma, so the bit of intestine, doesn't have any nerves actually, so people don't even feel it. What they feel is the stools going into the skin, that you feel it because it's acid and it burns. Yes, so the infection, yes, it's a lot like when people have a lot of leaks, it's end up like burning or getting infection or even skin conditions. It's very typical to develop after having that much because at the end it's even years.
Places, I guess, falling up where sepsis is an issue. Because I'm assuming the way it's stitched together, that in no chance could the waste go back into other cavities of the body.
Mhm.
Because that would be a very dangerous sepsis, bacterial sepsis.
Yes, actually, one thing that it can be a problem is people try to create like some way of the output not getting out. It can block and get inside, but because it really needs to get out, basically. Mhm.
Yeah.
So it's
And then maybe you
possible.
want to show the last picture
Yes.
of the, I think just the class of things.
So this is like students from the US actually that designed this. They went to Tanzania and they had a look at, yes, that people were making it themselves, the ostomy bags. And they tried to look at what people were using, and they had like these fabrics that they use a lot. So they tried to make like a belt out of this kanga fabric, and then the same like this plastic that you can find in other places, and like a bottle as well. And putting all of this together, you had a system that looked quite consistent.
And I think one comment on this is just, it's important to understand as you're thinking about projects, this is step 0. You should always do this step, but there is a lot more that you can do that will go in a way of adoption of a solution. So, I think this is why when you see these sets of solutions, unfortunately, when nothing exists, people will do whatever they can. I mean, that's part of life. That's what you have to deal with. But at that same time, if you just stop there, that is unfair. And so in some sense, I can look at this. So when you're starting to think, it's actually very valuable to just say, what is the shortest path for me to get somewhere? Because then you have something to evaluate. You have something to improve. So often enough, if this is the first time for you to create products and solutions, the first sets of things you make, you should not be satisfied with, but that's not the reason to not make them. You still make them, you still validate them, you still test them, and you go ahead. You don't just start with a nice, beautiful CAD of, this is what my dream, and then you figure out like, none of these materials might actually work out. So, these types of images and thinking about sets of current solutions that exist is an incredibly important part of your Fred Park, because you want to be able to say, look, I think somebody got there, 70% there already, but it's just, this is not going to get adopted. This is, here are the biggest sets of things that I think about, then I'm going to focus on building upon on top of that. So I think this is why I really enjoyed that photograph, and I saw it. It's like, this is an obvious space that a lot of you could actually be thinking about. So that's Team Ivana. You guys should figure out a name. Anybody, and this is also just folks online. I want to just use these sets of sessions as recruitment. So thank you, Ivana. Anybody else who wants to go up, just share their Fred Park, talk about project that they are thinking about. This is your chance. If you want to recruit people to your team, this is the best way to do it. Any volunteers? Do you want to talk about anything on the heavy metal threads? It depends. This is your class. I think I could spend, this is what I was saying, I could spend a lot of time just giving you guys case studies and things that I might find relevant. This is where the rubber meets the road. What I get excited about is seeing problems that we can actually solve during the short period of time we have. That is the best use of our time. So I'm curious, anybody online wants to, I see some hands. So Tushar, do you have your Fred Park on Discord?
No, I have not gotten it ready yet, but I'm working on it and will send it by tonight. But like,
Do
I
you
just
have
wanted to talk about.
any document, or do you want to just talk through a problem?
No, I have collected some data, so I'll talk about it. Like, do you want me to share my screen and present my data? It isn't much though.
That's okay. Why don't you still talk about the problem? I think it is
Yeah.
important for people to start. I know Niam had already mentioned the microplastic space. Khan has already mentioned the pathology space. There's a whole bunch of projects that I have in mind. some of them ongoing. I had mentioned about lead and the turmeric side, but I often hesitate just seeding projects myself because I would do them anyway. And it's much more valuable to just make sure that there is enough projects that many of you are passionate about that kind of rise to the table in some sense. Okay, so I see Tushar and then Pawan.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead,
So
Tushar.
yeah. Okay. So on 17th Jan, I visited to one of the villages of Haryana, India. Okay, and I was just exploring the place, and I realized how a lot of people there do not have access to toilets. Right. And I mean, I would not have been much surprised about it, but the thing that struck me was that I visited the same place on 2009, and the case was the same. So from 2009 to 2024, again, the same people, they did not have access to toilets, right? So for this project, I decided to dig into the problem. I was looking at why people do not have access, and I did, get some interesting projects that people worked in the past, like composting toilets and stuff. But again, if the solutions exist, why do people do not have access, right? So I can start digging more, and then realize that about 500 million people do not have access to toilets, and in a year, about 100 billion kg of waste just is on the land, right? Openly defecated, and those get consumed by animals. Those get into water sources and rivers and stuff, and a lot of those waters are used by farmers, to uh, produce food, right? And a lot of children tend to have diseases, and about millions of people die because of the diseases that they get from this open defecation. So about 500 billion people throughout the world. And recently,
What
I
Tushar is referring to is diarrheal diseases. Anything that has a fecal to oral transmission, human waste is one of the biggest cause from a transmission cycle. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, and recently I read this news article that said that in one small area of Haryana, there were about 500 children, or 500 children who, I don't remember the date, the context properly, but about 500 children who didn't, could not go to schools and stuff, especially girls child, because again, they do not have access to toilets, so they cannot go to school. What if they need to go to the toilets, so their parents would not allow them to. So I realized how this one small problem of the lack of access to toilets lead to a lot of other problems, right? People like health issues, right? Children not being able to go to schools, so leading to education issues, right? So yeah, that's what I have decided to for this, Frugal Sense project. I'll work on this problem of lack of toilets. So yeah, if anyone is interested, definitely reach out to me and we can work on that.
So on that note, I also want to kind of, there is an organization, Tushar, that we have been working with for a while. I'm on the board of this entity, and I just want to share one solution space also associated with this. Can you all see my screen? So this is Shiri. India has had just the numbers on India itself, Tushar talked about. There's been many sets of campaigns around making toilets. The government had a phenomenal campaign, and what is reported often is a number, but if they're not used, if the toilets are not used, then it doesn't count as an effective solution. And one of the bottlenecks that Shiri identified as an organization, now this is an NGO in another part of India, close to Bihar. And what they realized is that unless you can maintain toilets and keep them at their highest standard with the kind of cleanliness that someone might expect, the usage just drops out completely. And so one of the models that they are testing, it's a remarkable model, and I'll have Anoop act in and connect with one of the teams if you guys pick up the sanitation side of the story. The innovation that they had is it's a community toilet. So it's in a village, and there are X number of them, and you can go. It's free to use, and then effectively there is someone whose job it is to make sure that someone gets paid. There is kind of a regularized maintenance around it. They built a tracking system. So there is quality control and kind of applied a lot of this classical things that you would actually use to just maintain quality in this perspective. And the entire thing is solar powered. So they one of the big things that they looked into is like, what are the energy requirements of just a community toilet to make sure that you can get the kind of power. It has pumps to draw water at all times, even if there's no electricity. So it's almost independent from the traditional grid. And the idea was built it as a franchise so that then anybody else can take that model and replicate a system anywhere else itself. So now a couple of government agencies are actually picking that up. And the only reason I'm just mentioning this is if a team builds around this, I'll bring Anoop in. I want to make sure that there is momentum, that you guys are actually excited. There is 2 or 3 people team that really tackle this problem. And then I'll see if Anoop can spend some time. I mean, he's built this NGO over the last 10 years. And one of the important aspects of something like this is there's lots of very specific technical problems itself in that space then. So it takes 10 years to come up and scale and build an organization that causes change. But there can be many, many, many sub-projects in that space that you could think about. So Tushar, just post something on Discord if folks that are interested kind of put together. And at this point, what you can do is on Discord, create channels just dedicated to projects. So both for you, Ivana and Tushar, just create a Discord channel, and then anybody who joins that channel and all the conversation, and then I'll start pulling in mentors to have just conversations with that subgroup. Okay, I see Pawan's hand. Go ahead, Pawan.
Yeah. So I was kind of fascinated by the X-ray thing, which you mentioned as a passing remark, and then went down the rabbit hole and saw like a bunch of YouTubers have done a great job, more than what academia has actually posted, and the different ways to actually measure and like all the different failure modes. And some people even documented the failure modes. It was actually helpful. And the authors have gone further, but not a lot, where they have quantified the X-ray strength and the energy and the quality based on velocities and basic parameters which you can tune. But that's about it. They've not pushed. There's a bunch of patents, and I contacted the first author of the University of California paper, and so I have a meeting with that person next week to just see like what are they doing, like just to get a sense of what they're up to. But I've ordered the Geiger counters, but I thought this was a very fascinating place for at least to work in like soft tissues. Like I have my Fred Park; it's still a work in progress, but can someone open it or share their screen?
Yeah,
Because I'm on a
I can
phone,
share
so
that screen. Is that
it's on the Fred Park thing. I just posted a link.
The Fred Park channel is right there. And I see Nima, I see Ivana, Late, Elizabeth, Pawan. Okay, I'm opening that right now.
Yeah. So
Just so everybody remembers, this is associated with ultra low cost X-ray production for all kinds of uses.
Forgot the context. Yeah.
So okay, yeah, your Fred Park is online now.
Yeah. So the thing is, most of the medical relevance is in the order of like 20 to 60 keV, but at least the paper, when it quantified it, it's mostly 5 to 20 keV. So it's on the lower end. Either we have to kind of increase the vacuum, which makes making high quality vacuum tricky, or you have an array of it, or you choose like soft tissues and use high sensitivity dental films to sort of compensate. And the other ways I was thinking to bypass is like increase some sense the exposure time. Like in a medically privileged area, they can kind of have a very high quality source. Here we can sort of keep the patient rather steady and then increase the exposure time to kind of increase the quality, and also use in some sense AI to kind of reverse enhance from this. Like this is still considering what LLMs and vision models can do right now. I wouldn't have thought of it a year ago, but now you can unblur things fairly reliably. So if you
Yeah,
have a
and then
large
in general, the field of what is called computational optics, I
Yeah.
think what Benedict talked about early on was trying to do a lot of things in the optical domain. Now, for a lot of solutions, even your cameras and cell phones, the picture that you take is not the picture that the camera saw. There's
Exactly.
a ton of computational enhancements that are done. And, in that realm, nobody cares. It's just aesthetics, or maybe you care, but that's what you're stuck with. But in the diagnostics framework, there is a massive amount of threads that you can do that from a low resolution image, you can actually still decipher the diagnostic value out of it. Yeah.
So like
a couple of
example-
comments, Pawan.
Yeah, go ahead. Go
One
ahead.
important thing to do is I often like this approach that when I'm excited, and I think I'll when I do the one-on-one sit down, I'll also bring another radiology student who's been working with me on this X-ray source idea. And he's made quite a lot of progress on the detectors also, because we started with, if this exists, we have to think about detectors. One important space to dig in a little bit as next step would be making sure that you choose a target diagnostic application. Initially, in our case, we had chosen chest X-rays because chest X-rays are the most common TB test.
Yeah.
And you need to do it in a screening case because people will come in, they will have no symptoms, but they have nodules, and that becomes problematic. And it's a very clean use case, but then again, it requires and pushes the bounds on what the system can do. And so this is a little bit of a trade-off always. You have to be excited about ideas because otherwise, you feel kind of lost. But you also have to be excited about a problem to crack, and slowly you make progress on both sides, and you can compromise and expand on your ideas, and you can compromise and expand on your problems to just see where that match lies. So it's a little bit of a kind of a process, but it's valuable to choose. I mean, it might be that in this kind of a context, there is a broader perspective around, there's a lot of new things that open up. The reason I've been excited about this X-ray source, it can actually be conformal. Often X-ray sources are not distributed, they're point sources, and you need X-ray optics to get around. It's a very strange kind of a source because it's made out of a tape. So you can imagine that it's an X-ray source that could conform to the human body in ways that other types of instruments might not. So I think play around with the problem space as well, because it will give you metrics to say, I am able to meet that metric or not. And it doesn't matter whether you're not, then you broaden the search for the sites of problems itself. But I think it would be very valuable. And some of that is already here. And then the other framework to think a little bit about, there is also has been a massive expansion in the reduction in cost on digital X-ray detection. So the detectors have gotten remarkably good. And we've been thinking a little bit about intersection between the manufacturing process that's used for making TV monitors and exploiting and exploring some of that to be thinking about digital X-ray detectors. Because that's another part of the problem, is that the supply chain of the traditional detectors and things and what you could do in the digital domain is another space in X-ray that's actually useful. And then, we have to do this very carefully, but if the team gets excited, I'll have and bring a lot of, we bought a whole bunch of old dentist X-ray machines. So we have 2 or 3 of them. We can open them up. For that particular team, you guys should really understand what is the most portable X-ray out there. Every time you go to a dentist, that little portable thing is a remarkable instrument to be thinking about itself as well.
Cattle X-ray, which kind of is more portable because at least dental people go to a dentist, but a cattle doesn't. So, and those I realized that even more portable, the veterinarian X-ray. which is
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the
No, I was
detector
thinking
and the
more
source.
about the cost. I just went on eBay and wanted an X-ray system that's the lowest cost, and that's basically when the dentist office shuts down, they sell their X-ray machines. And you know, there is a remarkable this whole portable X-ray space is exploding, but at that same time, it's not focused on access yet. So that's why it's actually a very important space to think about. Okay, next I have on my screen Shoju. Shoju, do you want to turn in your
Hi,
camera?
I am.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, yeah,
And then
yeah,
just
it's my.
reintroduce yourself so
Yep.
people get to know you.
Hi, my name is Shugo Kato. I'm PhD student in biophysics, currently in Germany. So, my idea is not still refining process. It's not elaborate idea, but I'm interested in the problem dealing with the invasive species in nature. For example, in the liver, we have the invasive crayfish, frogs, and fish. In the context of I'm originally from Japan. In Japan, we have a lot of invasive crayfish in the liver, and usually it's not easy to get back to the original state. So that's why I found it's very interesting problem. So I want to tackle with how to quantify the number of the species and also how to eliminate them. So to
I
do
just
this,
wanted to mention,
yep.
Shoju, I'm assuming everybody knows what a crayfish is, right? And it doesn't look
Yes.
like a fish. So,
Oh yes.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. So I'm interested in. So for example, I'm interested in quantify or monitoring with the optic tool, or some develop some tool to catch them with the Frugal web. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and
that's
then
all.
Shoju, can you say a little more about the invasive crayfish and the breadth of species in their larval state, or what is the smallest? Because often enough, you know, of course, they grow to a certain size, but is there an intuition in terms of thinking about the larval stage that you
Okay.
could
Yeah.
potentially detect them because they would be more abundant rather than
True.
finding the adults?
Yeah, I have never thought about, but it would be nice if we can detect even the younger stages using the microscope or something.
Yeah, I think the reason I was mentioning that is less on the microscopy side, but more on this notion that, you know, eventually detection and detection methods imply whether what is the abundance, and based on that, you go back and back calculate. And so thinking about larvae, whether they have different sets of behavior, and whether in the life cycle context, there is a stage that could be detected because they were more abundant. So yeah, I think a little bit about this. Make a list.
Yep.
Also on the Fred Park side of the story, because I mean, again, you know, I think there's a couple of tools already that we can play with and get started. So if the first instars, for example, are between the 500 micron range, this is very similar to a use case that we are building for Planktoscope for detecting mosquito larvae. And I don't have to explain why detecting mosquito larvae is very important, because a lot of time the adult mosquitoes are hard to catch, but you can detect mosquito larvae. So if it turned out that the crayfish size and form factor is very similar to mosquito larvae, then I think there is a thread that we have been building really around testing, and it will actually be really fun. And then we can immediately get started on a space that's associated with both the detection and modifying the planktoscope to try to handle for as a screening tool at the larval stage. And then again, all of the hardware for that would require for it to also be independently placed in aquatic streams. So there is still a lot to be done, that you can use the planktoscope as a core framework, but eventually you have to make that such that it sits as an autonomous detector somewhere far away. Yes. Uh-huh. What are snake heads? They're not heads of snakes, clearly. Can I Google it and nobody's gonna cringe? No? Snake head. Should I write fish? Because snake head by itself, who knows what Google has to offer us. Is that correct? Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Sorry, I'm laughing, but you guys are not seeing. Okay, so there is a snake head. Yeah. Yeah.
But in Singapore, I know invasive snakeheads are a huge problem in terms of like a lot of our freshwater. There aren't that many freshwater bodies left that are sort of quote unquote uncontaminated by invasive fish, which has pushed out a lot of native fish species. And these fish go really, really, really large, really, really, really fast.
So then they have a big impact itself as well. Yeah. 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 And I think this is a great example that as a team, so we could put together kind of an aquatic invasive monitoring team while Shoujo could be thinking about crayfish, somebody else could be thinking about snakehead larvae, I'm thinking about mosquito larvae. So that's a perfect way of building a team where it's the core principle are similar, and then you can all be doing an individual sub project in that broader team. But it's kind of fun that people that deeply care about something to come together. There was a comment. Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the big things that we've been looking at is everything that we've done on Planktoscope has really been very oceanic, and trying to move some of that work on monitoring side of the story. I think already I'd mentioned Nima had talked a lot about microplastics per se. That's another space. So why don't you guys create a sub-channel in Discord around invasive species? And some core technologies might actually be very similar, or they can depart at a certain point, but at least it'll be a core group of people that's excited about invasive species in general. I think it's this underlying ecosystems change so dramatically, and we only read through the consequences, but we really have absolutely no monitoring systems around the world in an aquatic side. Even when it comes down to things that have freshwater supplies, and I just got back from Peru, and I mean, I just looked, the entire Amazon is literally just flooded rivers. Everything is connected through rivers. And we have absolutely no monitoring frameworks I mean, and again, Amazon is a big place, so you have to also be thinking quite a lot about how the idea scales, especially on, if you are thinking a little bit on the real-time monitoring side. Okay, other projects or comments? Henry, yes.
I know they use like things like the rivers.
Yeah, Argo is way too expensive, has no imaging capabilities, so it's basically, you'll be using a tank for a hand wrestling battle or something. Argos are really designed for depth. And so I think one space that we've been very interested in that we have used in this perspective is also schistosomiasis. So as a lab, we do a lot of work in Senegal. I'll show you guys what that parasite looks like. That's in Lake Victoria itself as well. So again, another space that I could see. So we've been using now planktoscopes as a way to track these parasites. So, most of the time, and I'll talk about schistosomiasis at some point of time itself, because there's a lot of work that we do, but that's Lake Victoria. and you can kind of see massive number of infections. And this is a parasite that if you enter in the water, it penetrates your skin, and then you are sick forever most of the time. And it just, after malaria, it has the biggest impact on people's lives. But all water sources are infected. This is why when you travel, you should be very careful which water you go swimming in. And again, the huge side of this story is tracking is one of the most important ways of being able to think about how you would address this as an issue. And again, has things related to sanitation, because the life cycle of the parasite from the human to the water body for it to continue is open defecation and urination. So what Tushar was talking about is actually connected to this in some sense. But we've been building a way to capture and monitor snails, and also a way to capture and monitor the schistoparasites itself, which are these, these tiny little, maybe 500 micron scale. So they're very well suited to the same sets of things that we're talking about. So, it can range from invasive species to diseases directly, but the idea of volumetrically sampling our aquatic ecosystems. Okay, other sets of ideas. I think we're kind of on a roll. Yes. And then can you introduce yourself also? Yeah, you have to talk through this actually, so it's better for you to come up front. Is there a Fred Park that I can put up there, or talk through?
I can just kind of talk through. I've changed my idea. Okay. Hi everyone. Nice to meet you on Zoom. I'm Nuvita. So I started off interested in a lot of problems, but I'm largely interested in climate change, and with that, problems that disproportionately affect the global south. So one thing I've been thinking about is cooling and heating technologies. So air conditioners use quite a lot of energy and they're really expensive to operate. So in countries that are heating up a lot quicker than, let's say, America, these technologies are already hard accessibly, and now there's a growing demand for them. So I have been thinking about other methods of cooling, such as passive cooling, and thinking about how we could remove heat effectively from a system. So with that, I made like a Discord post, but I can kind of reiterate. The two things that I'm interested in is like making cheaper dehumidifiers that are more accessible. So currently there are electric dehumidifiers, and there's also desiccants, which are charcoal, like the silica gel that you might find in your clothes. But neither are quite scalable. So I've been looking for a happy medium in between. And another avenue that I've been exploring in the more cooling side is energy efficient fans. So larger fans are far more effective at cooling people down than small fans because they can move a larger column of air. However, they've mostly been used in commercial and industrial applications, and those fans can range from $4,000 to $10,000. So I've been interested in figuring out a way to cut the cost of those fans because they move at really low speeds, so they take up less energy to use. So I was coming from the perspective of my experiences in India, which is where my family is from. So I've typically only seen small fans that kind of move around, which work, but I wouldn't say they work well because when you have that kind of fan, you're trying to cool up the whole system instead of just the individual. So that's kind of largely what I'm interested in, looking at those technologies and figuring out a way to make them cheaper. Yeah.
Comment I was going to make was I'm going to just show this graphics and then comments and questions. It would be phenomenal to build a team around this, primarily because, first of all, there is a massive amount of documented literature on health risks associated with heat. There is a point of time, if you cross that temperature, then it is not a livable temperature. Just like we are all organisms, so there is a true limit if you cross that temperature, and many people get exposed to those temperatures intermittently. But more and more so now, because if your lifestyle or your work requires you to be outdoors, it's very difficult to be. So there is a very clear-cut case of thinking about what the health risks are. And, I think just in this scenario, there is a lot in the last year that's really been written about the need for cooling at all scales, at all costs. Of course, we can cool in buildings, but you have to cool wherever humans are. And so there's a lot of stuff that I can share in terms of this would be phenomenal in terms of just thinking about, and ironically, just this effective cost of cooling and thinking in terms of the energy cost. It's quite tricky. So, I don't know if some of you saw recently, there were these proposals that air conditioning should be a human right. And it's starting to dawn on people that, okay, if the world temperature nobody cares about, then where are the rights and regulations associated with it? So this would be a phenomenal team project. Comments? Yes, Henry, and then Tanvi. Yes.
I just a question about what constitutes a large fan?
Yeah.
Would those large, or square fans be considered small?
Yeah, so a large fan typically is one that you'll see in huge diameters. Like it might be, each blade might be 4 or 5 feet. And they're often moving at snail speed, but they're just quite effective at keeping the system.
Do you know cooling areas exist in India? Because I lived in Germany for the longest time and there is no air conditioning there. And what they would do is that they would have air conditioned spaces where people hang out at.
Yeah.
Sometimes. So would that be a fun?
Yeah, so India has like air conditioning and often I would say
Bigger idea with like a huge fan, but like in a central place in the community, so that way it might be expensive. Or people can go hang out there.
yeah, that's a really cool idea. I haven't thought about that, but I think
I mean, in general, there's lots of community places. So even in a traditional, if you're really thinking about a rural village life, much of the life revolves around, most of the day, nobody's in their home. They really are in these community centers. So most of the time, those community centers are built around a tree. Guess why? Because trees provide shade and it's cooler. So it's, in some sense, thinking a lot more about the community. I mean, it's similar to that community toilets idea. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I know, like a lot of organizations in Europe working on like they're also like the better ones are often more expensive than long just end up paying that fruit white. That's something,
no, I'm very much interested in like extreme efficiency overall on the scale. One concept that I looked into, was radiative cooling.
Yeah.
So Singapore does these bus stands, which basically Singapore is quite tropical and humid, so a lot of technologies that I think they've implemented really well could be very transferable to most of the South, like given the cost reduction. But they have these concepts called radiative cooling bus stands, and you kind of walk in, and it's like a plastic film that covers these pipes that have refrigerant flowing through, and so your body heat exchanges heat with these like coils, basically. I thought about things like that, and I'm totally open to those ideas. My main kind of constraint that I was working under is electricity is costly in India, and they have a lot of grid problems. So it's coming from that context, but in like
and I
community
think
centers,
the
it would
thing
be
that I want to see is in this phase, I want to see very detailed Fred Parks around it, because you can't make decisions without explicitly putting, otherwise you bring a biased approach to this problem. So just make sure that you have a very broad scope, list through certain things, and you might say that, oh, in this list, I haven't gotten down the path of this. I'm just really focused on this right now. As long as you have in that list other sets of things that you've also thought about. But I think you should all, for every project, should be making and remaking your Fred Parks. Yes.
This is just a question about the issue of like heat. Because this summer I was in Tamil Nadu and like working on like a project about the climate adaptation needs of the community. And like for me, I'd never been to India in the summer, and it was like I was dying.
That's
And
hot.
it was really hot, really, really humid. And so part of the interview questions that I asked was about like heat and whether that was a big issue and what people were doing about it currently. And like I interviewed children, I interviewed like elderly people. Like maybe one or two people were like, yeah, it's an issue. And like nobody else seemed to think that, which to me was so shocking because I was like really suffering. But like, and like obviously people are putting air conditioning in their homes because they want to cool it down. But in some of these more rural areas, it seems like maybe people are just like fine with the heat or like and that if they just it's like, oh, you drink juice, we sit in the shade and so
Mhm.
is it maybe it's different in other parts.
No, I think, I mean, one, just building on this, it's, people's perception versus what's happening physiologically to people is two different things. And so many of these Lancet papers actually talk about this, is that there is the behavioral adaptations. There's certain sets of people who can adapt very quickly, certain sets of jobs that will be impacted, while with this progression in mind, there is a hard cutoff. And so this is a nonlinear process of our perception of heat, our adaptation to heat. It's very specific to the humidity that's local. It's very specific to what people have been exposed from an evolutionary point of view. But I think the projected scenario is really, even if you were to consider a couple years from now, and studies have been done on things like that, where just human body stops functioning. And so I think it would be phenomenal for you to actually share. Because clearly you've thought about this problem, to actually share the surveys and think about, how do you interpret it in the light of what's coming? And again, it's actually a very interesting approach too, is sometimes what else could you ask or inquire? What else data could you collect, numbers, to make sure that it is a problem? Yeah. Okay, I want to switch to other sets of problems just to make sure that lots of problems are covered. Any volunteers in this group? So far, we've had two. Is somebody committed enough that you want to recruit? It's perfectly okay if it's an ill-formed idea. But I think I want to make sure that ideas are sprinkled across. We've had sets of things on medical side. We just discussed a climate thread. We discussed the environmental side. We discussed sanitation, hygiene. That's much more on the social front. There's a whole bunch of things that I've talked about in the class before. Diagnostics is always a very popular thing. You guys will spend a lot of time in the lab tomorrow, building a diagnostic device. So there's a lot of platforms to play with. Yeah. I mean, oh, is there a hand? Okay, I see. Was there somebody who was about to raise a hand here? No. Okay. All right. Okay, let's go somewhere and then I'll come back. I do want to hear what you're thinking about, because there's no escape. You don't get to pass the class if you're not doing a project. So, okay, Weber, go ahead.
Hello, Professor. Am I audible?
Yes, and then can you reintroduce yourself also? Just
Yes, Professor. I'm a computer science, second year computer science student at Ashoka University. I live in Delhi, India.
Mhm.
The problem I was trying to solve was the air pollution problem in Delhi uh, that stay persists around this area for 5 to 6 for the winter months, 4 to 5 months, starting somewhere around October to January. And a unique thing about this problem is that the air quality goes to some 8 times or sometimes 10 times below what's the normal or what is considered healthy. And majority of the pollutants are particulate matter, which are some 10 micrometers in diameter or less, PM10 and PM2.5.
Yeah,
So,
keep going.
yeah, Professor. So, and one another finding about the problem is that the around this time the air inside the homes is found to be more polluted than the air outside. And because of that, since people need to stay inside their homes for most of the times, and they won't be, a lot of them aren't willing to wear masks inside their home, pollution masks. So I was planning to, the only option left with is some device that can be kept inside the homes, which can at least keep the air inside the homes better, slightly better quality than what they're breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the solution is to design basically a cheaper air purifier. So right now the air purifiers cost around $70 to $80, the decent ones, and which is a which is a huge amount for a lot of the sections in this area, $70 to $80, and a lot of people because of this aren't willing to pay for them. And the air purifiers themselves cost a lot. They aren't modular in design.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it costs a lot to replace them or get them repaired. So I was trying to come up with some air purifying technology that is modular in approach, and where someone can themselves replace the filter, and the filter should be easy to reproduce and cost effective.
Yeah, so Vaibhav, a couple of things. First of all, this is a remarkable project for this. I think the insight that you said that was surprising for me, that the air indoors is actually worse than the air outdoors. Because often we are told that when the air is bad is don't go outside. And you can imagine certain sets of criterias, and again, how buildings are designed, that there is no circulation and the impurities would then start getting trapped to begin with. Air pollution is also just one of the biggest link with a lot of respiratory issues to begin with. So it's not just comfort. You really do have to protect people from it. Uh, just building on what happened in COVID, I don't know if you know this, there is one class of this homemade air purifier that really took off in the US to an extent that a lot of people from a COVID perspective, for schools, public schools, we all built these air purifiers. There's a lot of technical work that's been done on it. Of course, it relies on availability of this HVAC systems filters. And that is a very expensive set of a component. So in a US context, people call these do-it-yourself purifiers, but with the advent that you can assume that these HVAC systems are available because they were conventionally available in kind of the home circulation systems and just in general the industrial system. So this might be a fun place to start and especially explore, really focus on the filtration material itself. Everything else is off the shelf and can be built. The cost of many of these things boils down to the material itself. And then we can have a separate chat. I'll send you a few sets of papers on what we have done in non-woven fabrics. Especially there is a paper that we wrote a couple years ago on using cotton candy machines to actually make filters. And again, I think the space is see what was done for COVID that actually might have benefits around, because again, the targets are very, very similar. And you want to see, in terms of economies of scale, the class of solutions that were built for COVID.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, no, I think this would be really fun. And also, there is the other aspect of this, which is relevant, is the project focus a little bit on thinking about finding the sources of the pollutants as well, because in some sense, there should be legal limitations around what you can spew in air. And often enough, because nobody's neck is on the line, I mean, people blame the farmers for burning their crops, but who knows? So I think having an evidence-based network that if you implement a project in which 100 purifiers were distributed around for free, but the actual filter for that was then later submitted for analysis, and you really try to track the sources, because at the root cause, it's the source of pollution.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I would love for us to be thinking about that detection and monitoring is part of a solution like this, because somebody should be held responsible in some way, and
Yes.
legal laws are an important aspect of this. Yes, comment. Yeah. Yeah. No, but I think the thread is that science is about facts. So you can go back and there's incredible traceability in chemical composition that could be even linked to a class of industries, right? So I think, in some sense, the challenge around some of these factors is that we just don't take a very quantitative approach. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying we have to begin, because otherwise there is no cost metric. Like air pollution and polluting air, there is no, it didn't just show up on its own, right? And I think the same thing can actually be said about even a lot of times when just wildfires here. And if we really do have monitoring involved in, there is and again, especially the industrial part of that, because not all air pollutants are also made equal. So if you're thinking about health impacts and say, what would be the biggest one that we should mitigate? Carbon soot is talked about quite a lot, but there is a huge variety associated with this as well. Okay, I'm seeing a couple of hands. Pranaya, do you want to go next? And then if you could just introduce yourself as well. Pranaya, can you hear us? We don't hear you. I think your audio is it's not muted, but you want to try unplugging the headphone? I think she said 2 minutes, not victory. Okay, I'll give you a few minutes. Anybody else wants to go? Yes. And then Henry raised his hand. No. Oh, it's the same team. Okay. All right, go ahead. Go for it. You want to come up here and talk? Yes. Is there a Fred Park or something I could open? Okay. Can you post them on Discord?
Post it to thread on the design board.
Design board, project design board right
then,
there. If I go up,
maybe.
did you just post them?
Yes.
Started a thread, see all threads. Awesome. Okay, you guys are prepared, but you were very hesitant to coming up front. I don't understand it. That's great. No, this is to freak everybody out that, hey, you guys are far behind. Exactly what I would like you to do. So it's not about recruiting, but if you have, this is the time. I'm going to do this more formally, but it's actually very valuable. You guys want to do as a slideshow or? There you go. Take it away.
Thank you.
I'll give a little introduction. So the idea behind this is, okay, so I'm originally from Honduras, and anyone that's been to the global south knows that drinking water there is very scary in every single aspect. You can't eat, for example, vegetables because you don't know if they were washed with water. You can't eat fruit because they might have water that is polluted. And it's a very debilitating experience, I think, for a lot of people. And from a health perspective as well, everyone should have right to clean water. And I guess this also came from a weird hill that I've always died on. I've always hated the bottled water industry because, first of all, plastic bottles make up for like 5% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. And I think privatizing a public good is something that should not, it's a catastrophe in my opinion. So additionally to enhancing the life quality of people and their access to clean water, we came up with the idea of making more affordable water filters, and we'll talk about that now.
Yeah. So this was Irene's brainchild, but luckily she kind of looped us in and kind of brought us into this idea. And so we're hopefully the idea is that we oftentimes these filters or to get this clean water, you'll use water bottles like Irene mentioned, or like you'll see Brita filters, or you'll have to boil water before you bath or before you cook, or everything such as that. We're hoping that we can design something that kind of seamlessly integrates with existing, I guess, water infrastructure, such as like faucets or like a shower head, or like hose attachments, and that you integrate the filter into that, just so that I guess it's easier to use, and so it's less of a behavioral change to get people to use this. I don't know if I'm missing anything.
I don't think so. I think the only thing I'll add is that this is a problem like also in the US. So obviously it's a problem in the global south. A lot of people have access to running water. I think it said like 70% of people have access to running water in the home, but there's still millions of deaths from waterborne illnesses. There's still like hundreds of billions of dollars spent on water bottles. But also this is a problem in the US because a lot of homes use private wells, which are pretty underregulated here. And because of climate change, our aquifers are getting more concentrated contaminants like pathogens and like lead and other things. Also, with the climate change and increasing temperatures, we have less frozen ground, and frozen ground is protected, a little bit more protected from like pathogens leaching into groundwater. And so we're going to have like some of these dormant pathogens entering groundwater soon. So yeah, this is a problem that's just going to become more urgent over time. Yeah, I think another benefit of this is that it's like community scale distribution. So instead of waiting for governments to kind of like clean the water or like somehow stop polluting the groundwater as much, you can just like people are empowered to just take control of their water supply at home rather than having to wait for some of these programs that are very slow. For instance, in India, the Jal Jeevan program is looking to make sure that every household has access to running water in maybe a decade or I don't know. I don't know the exact time scale.
It's also election season, so that has come up.
Exactly. So, so like the actual, I tried to look into their website and see like what their progress was looking like. It was kind of hard to find. So, and the idea for them is that this water is actually drinkable as well. But again, like it is election season. Don't know how seriously that is happening. So, yeah, these are some of the other solutions we got.
Yeah, so these are current solutions. I just want to like preface that though we have I think we have some group members potentially joining. We'd love more ideas on this or aspects that we may have missed. It sounds like we kind of have an idea of where we want to go, but of course we want to kind of take a step back and think of alternative ideas or certain aspects that we might need to consider, or I guess just more of the Fred Park kind of style. Yeah, go.
And then for the way that we were actually imagining that it should work, it would be a reverse osmosis system. And the whole idea behind it is that you have high enough pressure that is pushing onto a semi-permeable membrane. So for example, things that are bigger than the pores of that semi-permeable membrane would go back, and only the things that are smaller would go through. So that would mean that you'd be able to filter, for example, bacteria or viruses. And that is essentially the idea. And I guess for that part, coming up with an interesting material for that semi-permeable membrane will be the fun part. So we were talking about paper on Tuesday. That would be a very cool thing. So if you guys have ideas on what materials you want to use, what about like 3D printing a semi-permeable membrane? That would be super cool if you guys are more into physics and that kind of idea. And
Fred Park. I think post your Fred Parks publicly on Discord, because even though you are working on a specific problem of your own, it's totally fair game to contribute and help with ideas more broadly. You can be honorary members in other teams.
Yeah.
Because you have tangential interest while then you pick up something that you're choosing as a project.
And tell us about your experiences as well. Because, for example, I was talking to one of my friends who's Brazilian, and she was telling me that a lot of homes already have reverse osmosis systems that are relatively affordable to the middle class and the upper middle class. So they're running from $30 to like $300, but I want to get that lower because I think $30 when people are earning what, an average of $2.50 a day with inflation, probably like 10. I don't know, it's $10 a day, the average median.
I think 5.
Yeah. So when you're earning that much every day, I don't know if you're going to invest $100. Yes? So that's the idea. We want to make this modular. So if we're thinking about the idea of using like papers as filters, we want to make something that you can just maybe open up and then remove and then add again. And then maybe it's something that you have something that you can cut the paper out and clip it in. So you don't have to get rid of that plastic part or whatever it would be. So that would be the idea of, I guess it's also visible, right? When the filters are used up, I think they get all brown and nasty. So it's a visible thing. Yeah.
There's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
This space is massive in some sense. And I think one thread to do is get a deeper understanding of what's commercially available and how it's failing.
Yeah.
Beyond the cost, because there are other reasons people don't trust those types of systems and filters itself as well. And I think this is why that Fred Park is important, because we will have design discussions very specifically on plastic materials, inhibiting growth, detecting when each one of them require an expansion. So just break it down into this massive list and say the first biggest one we want to tackle is materials themselves. One side comment on this, there's a beautiful project that's been growing slowly, but it is actually very relevant to this, which is I have a friend at MIT, Rohit. His group did something quite beautiful in the space of looking at natural plants and plants themselves as filters. So you take a stalk of a small shrub, you chop it up, and it actually naturally has 20, 30 nanometer pores. So they've been testing it. It's just the flow rate is too slow, but it's a self-replicating technology, because then you just plant this tree, you chop them up, and you have filters for the whole year. And so
And also,
I think there's a lot that could actually be done in that space to make it practical. Because, but again, you can just borrow it and look in and say, oh, how did they validate their efficacy? So there is 100 nanometer beads in the lab we have. We can give those to you. It's very easy to run. So just test out in terms of just also thinking about in the process of testing, what is the validation that you actually need? Any other comments? Awesome. Okay. Was there anything?
One.
Yeah,
Can
go
you?
ahead.
Am I? Yeah, one of the concern is which I found challenging is because I have been there. The issue is also continuous piped water. So like most of my adult life, I was always spending time collecting water whenever the tap has water, like 2 hours a day, and collecting it in tanks. So, and that's the other concern, like how do you make it work? Because
That's a fantastic thread to be thinking about. If you're going to use pressure as an energy source, you want drinking water, and the classic way that people deal with it is, the hours the water is going to be there, you filter it and you store it separately, that this is my drinking and cooking water supply. I think, in terms of thinking about, there are ways around it. The thread that also happens for a lot of people, they have water tanks. So that storage happens there. And then the second tap, you would put a filter on the stored water supply, not the fresh water supply that's coming in. So yeah, I think it's in the Fred Park, try choosing one specific location and country, because you can't solve this problem for every place, everywhere simultaneously in the first go. So if you mention Honduras, just look at that average number of hours water comes in. What is the actual quality? Because it might be that it's decent and it just needs to be removed. This type of stuff needs to be removed. That's perfectly legitimate to be thinking about as you guys are structuring. And then again, some of this also boils down to comparing to current practices. So like that Brazil example is actually pretty good to just get a sense of, okay, how did they scale it? What does the market economics of that look like? Okay, anybody else? Any other last minute project? We're almost out of time, but I want to make sure that anybody who wants to gets a chance to recruit. Oh, Pranaya, let's give that a try again.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely. Perfect.
Thank you. So I'm Pranaya from Pune, India. And I was thinking on the same lines of warming, global warming. So trying to work towards energy efficient homes. But while going through the data and certain administrative policies, I thought it might be too complex to deal with at a lower scale, at a personal level as a project. So then while going through certain literatures, I came across Peltier and Seebeck effect, which could be used because their heat is a driving force in these systems. So I was thinking of creating a Peltier cooling system for vaccine carriers.
Uh-huh.
Like earlier, somebody was talking about cooling systems. So I was just wondering whether these systems can also be thought of to cool local environment, or maybe can just take ahead the vaccine carrier system.
Yeah. No, I think just a comment I wanted to make, it's this whole personal cooling devices will become a very serious business soon enough. So it is actually important to think about, just like vaccines, and the solid state cooling has its advantages and disadvantages, but you should definitely take a look at it because it's now the cost of Peltiers is coming down dramatically. They're not so efficient, but batteries are getting better. So this whole notion of solid state cooling, from a resilience, I think the big advantage there is that they can last 10, 20 years, and they are incredibly resilient. I think make a choice. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So certain system that I had seen, like it was a YouTube video which was heating the one side of the Peltier system using a candle or a flame. So I was thinking if you could concentrate the solar energy using a parabolic mirror, we could heat one side and the other side would be cooled. So, and on the other hand, when there is no solar energy available, we can use a kind of a hand, some hand machine that could be heated, that could use to heat the other side of the Peltier system.
Yeah, I think maybe one thread to think a little, choose a target problem and it'll set you the delta T that you're after. And then you can go from there. So if it is vaccines, take a look at the vaccines. Vaccine coolers that have cooling integrated have come online, but they're extremely expensive still. And then they also target these extreme temperatures like -80 and other threads, which, so I think, and there is, of course, certain class of passive cooling systems too. So one suggestion would be is when you're making the Fred Park, is it raining outside? It's a crayfish hiding in the... Sorry, there is some awkward audio coming through. Anyway, yeah, I think choosing the challenge will help you narrow that down. But it's also valuable to look at the manufacturing space. I mean, I think one thing that I'll just mention, I think I had shown it. Yeah, I think, did I mention the energy context for migrant and Rohingya camps, refugee camps? No. Did I talk about refugee camps at all in class? I'll bring up the challenge around refugee camps. And, solar panels and solar manufacturing is massively scaling. So building products that use them and embed them in all kinds of ways is actually a phenomenal space, because it's really remarkable in the last 5 years how the cost has just plummeted. So it's something that you would never think about in these types of solutions now really becomes possible. So I think, you're just playing with some of the context of thinking about what is the challenge on Peltier manufacturing. They are getting lower, but not as fast as many other things. And it might even turn out that there is some bottleneck there that's more interesting to then think about, because then it'll become a more general set of a solution. Okay, anybody else who might want to pitch a quick short idea, project? This is your time to recruit others. Yeah? Okay, so but we're making teams on Tuesday. So yes, comment.
How big can the teams be?
Good question. If a lot of people come together around a broader problem, then you can all work as a larger team, but then it becomes important that sub-teams then take real responsibility of sub-solutions because, I mean, I think often enough it's just from a functional point of view, 2 or 3 people core team for a specific problem is good. But like we were talking about this environmental monitoring side, it's perfectly okay that 4 or 5 people came together, but then each one of them chose a little niche of, oh, I really actually care about this species that I'm going to adapt the solution. So overall, the solution that they're discussing is broad. I think I just want to make sure that the teams are actually functional. It doesn't help that if, I mean, it's for your learning. So build functional teams, and it's people can play a slightly participatory role in multiple teams, but there must be one core team that you belong to that you're championing. So I think just play it by the ear. If it becomes too big, I'll tell you. So, I mean, you are tackling a big problem, but I would then assign when we do the one-on-one sit downs. So here is the thread. Are the sets of folks that have not as yet picked a problem, do you need problems for us to post? Because there's a massive idea board that I work on that we've been building. I'm happy to open and share that. And then you could say, oh, this is obviously something that I'm excited about. Or do you all have vague ideas? You're just hesitant to talk about it publicly as yet. Which of the two camps folks that haven't spoken as yet belong in? Are you guys inclined towards something, but it hasn't gelled, or it's a blank slate right now and you could be excited about working on many different things? Which of the two? Blank slate, you could be excited about working on all kinds of things, or no, you have some vague ideas, but they haven't gelled. Remember, we're not talking about solutions. It's just a problem that you have to care about. Blank slate. Okay. Why don't I do this? Why don't I open the idea board just so that you guys can look at, like, it's a massive space of challenges and things. I mean, the world is filled with problems. So that's not an issue. It's just something that you are committing to resonate. But Tuesday, we are making teams. So what we'll do is after the class, we'll post an idea board link that has a breadth of things in these 3 or 4 areas. And you can start building on top of that. There are some very specific projects that as a lab, we are currently just initiating. Any of you could actually join in something like that. You know, there is a lot of platforms that we have built, and you could just say, I really like this platform. I want to use it for a specific function. That's also fair game. But I think by Tuesday, everybody is in a team. I think that part is important. So this weekend and tomorrow will be valuable. We were going to do a diagnostics demo. You'll all be making a diagnostic device tomorrow, but we could save some more time for just one-on-one discussions. For folks that have seen the idea board, but you're still not sure, I can sit down and try to do a more of a hard sell of why you should pick up this problem. And you can also just come and share that, oh, this is the skill that I have. Like I was talking to Mrinal the other day. They just came back from Ethiopia. They have clinical background. It's very clear what is a project that we could build together. So I think there are things that you can approach me and tell me about, oh, this is kind of the skill that I've been developing, or a skill that I want to develop. Is there a project that would actually utilize my intrinsic, like, you know, you were talking about soft robotics. You should make a soft robot water filter. It's not totally crazy. I can tell you that. So you could say, hey, this is kind of the subset of a skill set. I really love designing and CAD. And then I could also pick up and say, oh, this team could actually really use, or here is a challenge. Okay, so we'll do that tomorrow. We'll open up an idea board. And this comment is also true for everybody. By Tuesday, I really want everybody to have a team. Solo teams are totally fine. 2 or 3 people is an ideal team size. If you are bigger, then we'll kind of have some sub projects or sub themes, and try to share your Fred Park. If you write a Fred Park that's very well written, has certain sets of graphical context of the problem. I think Ivana has one example. I saw that and it was like obvious. This is a problem we should work on. And so kind of think a little bit about how you present the challenge, especially the problem, so that other people also see what you see in that problem. So this is, again, a classic technique that you all need to learn how to recruit people. Okay, any last minute questions, comments, open mic? Otherwise, I'm going to open that idea board. We'll just do the Notion page somehow, even if it's just read only. I think we can do that, right? Without any permission issues. Yeah. Yeah, we can also print it out and then just post a giant PDF. Oh, I see, Tushar, you have a question.
Yes, Professor, a few days ago, I posted this message on root cause analysis, and I don't remember, like you asked me to remind you, I don't remember if you talked about it.
Oh, can you remind me what I told you to remind me about?
Okay, it was about the root cause analysis. So I mentioned this point of how
Oh,
when
yes. Yeah. I think Tushar had mentioned this thing. I mean, again, and very specifically in the problem that you're thinking about, many social factors come into play. And it feels almost crippling to a point of, oh, where should the addressing be? Air pollution is the same thing. You could address the source. You could address it at a policy level. I think for the purpose of this class, I really want you to think about a new way of looking at technology where cost can drive massively many of the conversations. So while you should be aware of many other factors that are leading to the failure in a given set of a condition, it's still important to choose something and say, if I play my part and I potentially build this ecosystem, hopefully other people will build the other ecosystems to cause the entire impact to actually work out, because these are big problems. A lot of people are thinking about it. I think it's important to choose your passion and say, I'm going to take a viewpoint to this problem, knowing fully well that it is not a comprehensive solution. And the approach there is that, that's why many of us get trained as engineers, but then become policymakers, you guys becoming IAS officers or politicians and many other ways to implement more systematic change as well. But it is important to think about how market forces could actually cause grassroots changes. And I think the technique that I use for this is compartmentalization. For every problem, you should be perfectly comfortable with creating compartments. While you're really unhappy with one compartment, you can still work in a compartment because you want to be functional. I think with many social problems, it just creates anger. It creates this sense of dejection. Like it feels like, oh, even if I spend all my life, nothing is still going to change. And that might be true, but that's still okay. You're still looking towards a horizon that a couple of generations down the line, it might still matter. So I think it's important to be grounded in that scenario and start small. Just think about one single village. I think, even Tushar, you as an individual has a capacity to bring a class of solutions to one village with, say, 10 families living in. That's sufficient. That is a great experiment. It's worth it. So tune your scale as well. And then when you are about to reach the 10 family or 100 people solution, I use this trick where you then increase your ambition by an order of magnitude. So this is the powers of 10. Then you say, you move the goalpost when you're about to reach the goalpost. When you say, oh, 10 was very good. I think I was able to do it. I surprised myself. Let me actually see, what does this look like for not 1, but 10 villages? I think, there are many, many tools that you can use in that space. Giving up is not an option. That's kind of one approach to it. And then again, talk to more people. I think like the interviews that you do, people have ways of resisting and adapting that you can also learn a lot from. So in some sense, you are changing the current standard to something new, and that change will only happen slowly. And that's perfectly okay. There will be lots of things that will be in your hand, and there's also lots of things that will never be in your hand, even in the implementation phase. So I think it's all of these things in your Fred Park. You can make a list of these social issues around literacy and many other things that could be done that would massively improve the adoption of a solution. But right now you're not focusing on them because you're trying to focus on a different compartment. But the Fred Park helps you because once you write it down, it doesn't bother you so much because you know you can look back at it. You can say, I have it documented. I know it's an issue. I will tackle it. I'm not going to forget it. I don't know if does that answer your question?
Oh, yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So just, I think play with it. And then we can also talk more specifically, especially because you have a community nearby. And I would love for you, as you're thinking about the project, to keep visiting the community regularly because, you will be anchored and grounded to a certain extent. Okay, we're going to call it a day. We'll post the design session somewhere in the afternoon today. You guys should look through some of those. If you still really can't find something, write to me directly on Discord. And then tomorrow, as Hope and Anesta will be running the lab, we'll sit down and we will just have design sessions and we'll kind of try to make sure that everybody has a rough idea. Then you have the weekend to think. And then Tuesday, I would like all of you to just declare for the rest of the quarter, this is what I'm working on. Okay? Yeah? It's kind of like you're on a slide and you're hesitant and I'm just going to push you down the slide. But it's just a slide. I know you're going to be fine at the end. It is important to commit at this point. I think we're not going to have any time to do the technical work that I'm excited about you all to do. Okay? All right. Bye, everyone. I will talk to you all tomorrow. Oh, and